Okay. What then is your big takeaway from this episode?
I had one question for you before I share my takeaway, though.
Sure.
How do you feel about the bridge now?
Oh, right. I hadn't thought about it. And that's probably a good thing. Because I feel like it has become commonplace for me. It has become the new norm.
I was wondering because there is a scene where I noticed Kelly sat down in the bridge and I'm like, oh, the bridge does look pretty different. So I was like, I gotta ask Rob if you were still missing the carpet in the bridge.
It's already stopped feeling different for me. It did not take long.
Yeah, it just takes a little time to get used to it. Yeah, I think that it does look nice. It's very bright and it looked very epic during the battle sequences. I'll give them that. So.
Oh yeah, totally.
So my big takeaway from this episode, it was visually stunning. Like, I can't get over the CGI, the special effects, the lights, everything from this episode. Like, I love me some space porn. I love future city porn as well. Like, on YouTube, there's a bunch of like ambience videos that you can put on.
Mm-hmm.
So you can listen to gently rain falling or, you know, a fantasy city where hobbits live, like things like that.
It was not accidental that you just said gently rain falling.
I may have listened to that today while I was working, but there's also one where you can watch like cyberpunk cities and it has rain and it has like all the LEDs and lights. I put them on so that I have sound on when I'm doing my job. And this is the kind of city that I would want to visit if I ever got a chance to be in a future city scenario. Just
with less aggression and violence. I'm
sure. Like, no, yeah, take all that away. It looks like a beautiful place to visit.
Yeah.
But even seeing New York, like the little flying cars, like all of that, it's like that kind of stuff speaks to me on a level I don't fully understand, but it makes me so happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed getting the New York City moment, and then also Krill, getting to see that the place where we've learned so much about the Krill over the last few seasons. Now we got to see their home planet and how things work. And so I appreciated that they didn't shy away from showing lots of it too. They did not skimp on like, you got a little like back alleyway and then, oh, look over here. It didn't feel like a set. It felt like a literal city that they filmed this in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And even when Talea's doing her speeches up on that ledge, I don't know what the announcement balcony, the murder balcony.
The murder balcony.
It looked like a real city. Like when they would show her face and then like the background, I was like, this doesn't even look like a green screen. Like it just looked phenomenal. And that's the only way. The sets, everything.
They did not dial back the scope at all. They went full on.
No, I really loved that part of the show. Or this episode specifically. We had talked about it earlier, like the whole abortion thing that they brought up. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of topical issues I feel like they bring up in this show. And like in the past, they never give you like the answer to those questions. They always just leave the question lingering. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was an interesting interpretation of kind of how things are in the US specifically, just because of how divided our country can get on almost everything. So what I thought was just very interesting is that this was filmed like probably 2 years ago. And the topic is still very relevant today. Because recently in the US, there's like abortion laws and rumblings of overturning like Roe v. Wade. And just, I think partially scary for me that something that was an issue 2 years ago is still just as relevant today. And like that kind of stuff just like, it ignites a fire, but it just also frustrates me that our society is functioning in this way. So in a way, I know it was kind of like maybe that little bit was shoehorned into the episode a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of glad they brought it up because I feel like it made me more aware of just like, damn, there's just so many problems inherently in our society that just need to be fixed. And it sucks that I know this is a future fantasy show, that it's still a problem in the future, but also just like very real right now that it's a problem. So yeah, it just brings up questions that I'm kind of glad the show asks sometimes, because I think they're good reminders to just be aware of our political climate and what's going on in our world and the things to fight for. So that I appreciate. It did bring up a philosophical question about if Talea wasn't raised a Krill, who didn't have these fundamentalist beliefs, would she have had Anaya? Like, it just brings up, like, if her upbringing was different than being a Krill, what her story would have looked like. But that changes everything. It's the whole butterfly effect.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there. This is the rabbit hole I went down after the episode, just thinking about how things could be different for Talea and for Anaya. Because Anaya's an adorable little girl, and I only want the best for her. So...
protect at all costs.
Yeah. And just it also goes to show how damaging it can be when a fundamentalist or radical idea has been like, this is the only way. And so keeping an open mind, I think, is always a good reminder. I thought it was a great story about power and corruption. And it was, man, it's a dictatorship. At the end of the day, that's not a fair leadership role. It's just a really good discussion on the moral sides of how a lot of this stuff could have been handled and the differences between how the Planetary Union runs things and how the Krill run things. So the original chancellor seemed very much more like, yeah, let's make this treaty happen. But it just shows that there are issues in every society and that it doesn't seem like the future removes those issues. I'm always,
especially when we're looking at a different culture. Like, a lot of those things are probably more settled on the Planetary Union side, but we can hold a mirror up to our own society when we put it in something else.
Yeah.
Like, by putting those issues into the Krill society, we say, well, if it looks weird over there, why are we not thinking it looks weird over here?
Yeah, I found every episode so far this season has like left me sitting there with these like thoughts of like, honestly, moral issues, and just day after I watch it, and then even the weeks after, I keep thinking about those things. So I guess in a way I'm kind of grateful for it, because I feel like it's an intellectually stimulating show, and I very much have appreciated that it's not shying away from things that are difficult to address or even encroach upon. Like, a lot of shows just like avoid it, just like every which way, like we got to just dance around everything. And I'm glad that they're not dancing around stuff.
That's what good sci-fi does.
I know. Ed has a kid. I don't know if that's something you knew.
Does he?
I don't know if you knew that. Ed has a kid. So that was a big takeaway for me. I also am wondering if anything will come of Talea and Ed's relationship. Not romantically, maybe romantically, but just... I do think that there is a bond there, obviously, now with Anaya. I'm very excited to see the growth of whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And I also think, more importantly, what is going to be the dynamic of Anaya and Ed's relationship in the future, if any.
I'm curious to see that, yeah.
And last but not least, this episode featured a lot of Ed and Kelly's relationship dynamic.
Yeah.
And I feel like we haven't really seen that much so far this season. And I thought it was nice. There was like a tenderness to it. And maybe it's them arriving at closure on what their relationship was, or is it potentially blossoming into something a little bit more? I just enjoyed seeing their dynamic a lot this episode, because they were married. They've had issues in the past. It was just like they were there for each other, I felt like, in this episode. And Kelly on the Orville, Ed on the planet, I just thought that was a very interesting dynamic to have for this. And they're both great leaders. And it was just, there are a lot of sweet moments between the two of them.
True.
So, yeah, I don't know what'll come of that, but I did enjoy seeing their relationship this episode.
Man, this is a great episode. Like, it's super exciting. There's a ton of action. I had the same phrase, that it is visually stunning. And the humor is so organic. Like, while I've loved the show up to this point, this is the exact tone and balance that feels like its best evolution so far.
I
like
enjoy
this episode in particular really gives me what I've wanted.
I enjoyed the lighter moments that were peppered into this episode a lot.
And as we've kind of touched on in the past, they're not like, here's a joke for joke's sake.
Yeah.
They feel like, and this is something that we were told going in, that the comedy was going to feel more organic and more character based. And it really does.
Yeah, it's been, this season is very different than season 1 and 2. And I think that's fair to say at this point. But it's not a bad different.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's something where I feel like the show has grown into itself and it's now being more thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, and I headcanon this, and it just makes sense to me too from a storytelling perspective, the Kaylon War has changed things too. And I just feel like overarching the universe is probably a little bit different now. And that to me makes sense.
Not only the Kaylon War changing kind of the tone and attitude of everything, but the fact that, and we haven't talked about this much at all, and I don't know if it will be prominent, like they technically did not have to refit the Orville if they didn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
They could have chalked it up to it being a change of the timeline being reset and dialed back, because when they reset the timeline, there could still be leftover changes.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be 100% exactly like it was.
There's so many things that happen at the end of season 2 that could influence why season 3 is the way that it is. And I have a suspicion that we're still not going to fully find that out. I think everything in this show is so detailed. Every single person who works on this show is detail oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anything is not done without a reason. Does that make sense?
I agree with that. Yeah.
I don't know if that sentence made sense, but
no, that makes sense.
Just I feel like everything has a purpose on this show, and that it's not, they didn't just go wake up one day and go, okay, this is what we do now. Like it just always feels like everything has a place, everything has its moment. There's a reason for it all. And that's one of the things I love about the show, is that I feel like I'm never sitting there like, okay, wait, why did they do that? Like I'm never confused by this show, and I honestly really love that. I say
that for the most part, except for the simulation chamber scene, and this one that was a moment for me where I was like, wait, why? I get why you want to make this commentary. I don't understand why we're doing it right now.
It may have just been the moment to do it. I when I think about that whole issue being brought up, I immediately think about all the people who make a choice to have an abortion and then being chastised for it after, or being punished for it. And that's essentially what that was.
Right. I think about that as well. And I also think that that's a distracting thought from the story that's being told. It's taking me on a tangent that has nothing to do with anything else we've been watching up to that point.
Yeah. From a selfish lore perspective, I like learning about the Krill.
I can see that.
Yeah. So I think in some ways too, obviously it's an awful thing to do. I mean, I hope I've made it's a woman's choice or someone's choice to do that. And it just shows how the Krill are so fundamentalist and radical. And I don't know if that was also a way to show that. Like,
perhaps.
I think it just gives more background onto the thought process. And I will say, like, if you are in a situation like that, like, I think of cults. I'm not saying that the Krill are a cult, but, you know, you get brainwashed and you think that this is the only thing. And so there might be a deeper thing to dive into for that. But I can see what you're saying. Like, at first, it's like, wait, why? Okay. You know, Ed might be killed in the morning. So, you know, like, that's what my thought was.
Yeah.
He just found out he had a kid, though, and maybe it does help provide some backstory onto.
Maybe.
It can go a lot of different ways, I think.
If you asked me which character I wanted to see come back for season 3 the most, it was Talea. So I was absolutely thrilled to see her again. I find her to be such a fully realized, complex individual to the point where she's not only fascinating on her own, but she adds a whole level of depth to Ed's character as well.
They play off of each other really well.
Yeah, they do.
And when I was looking up the past episodes she's been in, she's made such an impact that like immediately when I saw her, I was like, you just know, just from her voice, and like you just know it's her. So she's also impacted a ton of the storyline over the years, I guess, at this point with the show.
Yeah, she's probably the most recurring outside of like the Admirals. She's probably one of the most recurring characters we have.
She's got a lot of charisma, and I like the way, like you were saying, Ed and Talia play off of each other. It just works really well. So I was excited because I had no idea. So that starting the episode, like as an Orville fan, I'm just like, because she's giving this impassioned speech, which is also kind of like, okay, but it's just exciting to see her character back. And I knew that the episode's going to be longer and we got to see Krill and all this stuff. So I was just like jazzed from the get-go.
Yeah. I did feel, and I think I mentioned this earlier, I did feel like some of the connections to modern day politics were fairly obvious and a little bit heavy handed, but that doesn't mean that they were unwelcome. A lot of the same ideas were pretty prominent in the comics as well. Like we read that, for anyone who hasn't read the comics that take place in between seasons, I highly recommend going back to some of those because you'll notice some of those same themes continuing from the comics into this episode specifically.
The comics are really good. If you like the show and you're like, I'm a little iffy about comics, I don't read comics all that much or graphic novels. I really like them.
Yeah.
They're really nice supplemental episodes is what I like to think of them as. And
that's how David Goodman described them too. He wrote them to be consumed like episodes. They should feel like episodes.
And I think they provide a lot of interesting background and other stories on the crew that we already know and love. And he did allude to in digressions that there's an Easter egg for season 3.
Oh, right.
And so now that season 3 is happening, I kind of want to just go thumb through that and see if I find anything.
That's a good call. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
So there's Easter eggs in the comics as well, as what I was trying to get at, is that for the show and other pop culture Easter eggs too.
Lastly, aside from that, there is not a lot of nitpicking to be done here. Like, I think this is the best episode of season 3 so far, and even one of the best episodes of the series.
It's a pretty phenomenal episode. It's got a lot going for it.
Yeah.
It's hard to fault something as pretty as this, but also the storyline holds up too. Like, it's not just something that's nice to look at. It's got a very compelling story that you get invested in. And like I said, I got goosebumps several times throughout this. And I was on an emotional roller coaster because like Ed has a kid, and that's how I know I'm invested in this show. It's just, I'm so attached to these characters that like I care about what happens to them. And like I just feel for the character in the sense of like he has this kid that he doesn't have access to, and just how heartbreaking all that must be. And he alludes to that at the end with, and I miss her. Is that weird to say? And I like how the writers have written dialogue this season that feels organic, kind of like you were saying. It just feels like conversations people would actually have.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like we haven't gotten, like Ed having a kid is as big a revelation as we got in Identity when we learned about what the Kaylon truly are.
The show does something special that I feel like I try to point out and you try to point out all the time, but the show does something special, and I just feel like this episode feels like a special episode.
It does. Absolutely. Okay. Before we get out of here, we have one more thing to do, because Katie's husband Mark is also a big fan of the Orville and always leaves us with his one sentence review.
Westworld Isaac, I see you, and you deserve your own episode.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. This is just a segment of the full podcast that Rob and I do. So if you want to hear more of our thoughts and full episode discussions, go to thegeekgeneration.com/quantum drive.